And Milton got energized about that, wrote the occasional article about it in Newsweek in the late 60s, and then was invited to be one of the 15 members of this Gates Commission that I mentioned that came out against the draft. And Milton, the way Milton tells it, there were 5 people against the draft to begin with, 5 in favor and 5 on the fence. And at the end, they came out 14-0 in favor of getting rid of the draft. The one person who didn't sign had been sick, and he said, look, I don't necessarily disagree, but I wasn't at the meetings. I can't really, in all conscience, do it. But do you want me to tell you one of the kind of the funny turning points in people's thinking at the conference with William Westmoreland?
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Well, General William Westmoreland had been in charge of all the ground troops in Vietnam, not one of his finest hours. And he was in favor of the draft, and what they did was they had people doing studies of how much the budget, what would be the budget implications of getting rid of the draft, but also they had hearings where people in the public, the military, and so on could make their views heard. So they're having this back and forth between William Westmoreland and the members of the commission, and William Westmoreland referred to the volunteers as mercenaries, and Friedman said, well, if you're going to call volunteers mercenaries, I'm going to call draftees slaves. And he went on to say that you are in there voluntarily, General. That means you're a mercenary. Our butcher we buy meat from is a mercenary. The lawyer we go to is a mercenary. All it means is you're paid to do something. And so, you know, there's no energy in that word. The word doesn't mean much. It's just this kind of name-calling, but in fact it's more accurate in a certain sense to call draftees slaves because they are slaves of the state for the period of their draft status or their time they're in the military, and of course they might be debt slaves.
It's a powerful way of looking at it, but it absolutely is slavery. I just want to quickly get in a question from our regular host, Scott Horton here, who's on the line.
Oh, hey, Scott.
Hi, David. How are you doing?
Good. How about you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Listen, so here's my thing. Well, I guess as you may or may not know, something that I've been talking about on this show for years and years and years is left-right coalitions. And, of course, most of the people I interview are from the left because they're the ones who care about the war most and do the best reporting and what have you. And so, I mean, I'm kind of the walking example of how well this can work with libertarianism as the real moderate center. You know, where the Liebermans and McCains are seen as the extremists that they really are, and you and I are the real moderates splitting the left and the right. But so it seems like everything's all about TV. And if it's not on TV, it doesn't really exist. And so what really needs to happen here in my imagination is some giant conference. Remember the Ron Paul counter convention during the Republican convention in August of 2008? We need a giant thing in a city like that in the center of America. I think that was in St. Louis or something.
Well, Minneapolis.
Oh, Minneapolis, right. In the center of America where people can get to it and have a massive convention that has all these leaders. And of course, we need to build up our list or whatever faster soon. And then we need to have a giant new anti-imperialist league that doesn't just have a conference like the one you went to, but has a giant thing with a conference for the cameras and for a massive audience chanting, bring our troops home right now. And really, you know, to put this on the next level, you got to put on a show, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. By the way, one little note to your pessimism about TV is, like, I didn't watch any of that Ron Paul thing on TV. I watched a lot of it on YouTube. And so you don't really need TV. And in fact, when I talk to young people under age 25, they're not watching a lot of TV. So I think YouTube will do it, and that's wonderful. And I think that's a great idea. I don't know how to do it, but I think it's a great idea to push for. One little friendly amendment to the name you gave this one organization, and it came up at our discussion at that Saturday conference, is Anti-Imperialist League. You can turn off conservatives so quickly with that term, but the conservative who pointed that out, when one of the people on the left suggested anti-empire, he said, oh yeah, I have no trouble with that, and my conservative friends would have no trouble with that.
Yeah,
And so,
that's something that we talked about with Beto and Zeiss as well. But it sort of seems too. I think someone wrote in the comment section on antiwar.com from that interview that, come on, if you're not going to call it what it is from the start, then what good is the rest of it going to be? And that's kind of a good point, don't you think?
Well, if it were a true point, it'd be a good point, but it's not a true point.
It's kind of the same thing with the name antiwar.com, right?
Scott, let me answer you, okay? Anti-empire is calling it what it is. So saying anti-empire instead of anti-imperialist doesn't mean you're not calling it what it is.
Yeah. Well, I guess I think of it like antiwar.com. People go, oh, what is that, a left-wing site? And then you go, no, read Raimondo, check this out. And they go, oh. Huh. And then it's more powerful that it's antiwar.com because you would think that would be a bunch of commies, but it turns out it ain't. You understand what I mean?
I do, and I think you're pointing out the pluses and the negatives. I mean, When I tell people I write for antiwar.com, a lot of them won't go read it. So they hate that term. Now, I'm not saying I have a better one for that. I'm just saying that does point to a problem.
Yeah, that really is its own damning commentary itself about our society, where that word makes people cringe.
I know. And these are not dumb people. These are smart people, you know. So it really is something how people, well, that's people, you know.
Professor Henderson, with all your peers in the libertarian intellectual world, are there any people who are actually giving you any objections, and what do you counter their concerns with?
I would say I get some objections, and it's hard to kind of generalize, except to say the one generalization is most of them are ahistorical. And what I mean by that is they don't know much history. And one of the things that really has made me more and more anti-war is the more history I learn, the more humble I become about the views I used to hold. I used to be a Cold Warrior, and I just think I shouldn't have been. And so when people who actually know some history and who are libertarians talk to me, they're usually on my side. And I've had a number of libertarians, libertarian economists, and so on, who have said to me, look, I don't have time to read antiwar.com given the things I'm writing about, but I'm really glad you're doing it.
So it's once again libertarian outsourcing and specialization here. Yeah,
that's well put. I think there's division of labor, there's specialization, and so I don't get, let's put it this way, I don't get a whole lot of flack from many of my friends for doing this. Mainly, I get strokes, and that's good.
What do you see? I mean, I know you had the vigil in Monterey, but what do you see the role of vigils and protests in actually changing public policy?
That's a tough one, Angela, because I don't know. In other words, I'm more of an agnostic, but I just think that the protests have been so bad, and I think I go back to things like Answer back in the early 2000s, where you were going to an anti-war demonstration, and when you got there and you listened to a few speeches, you wondered if you were at the right event, because it wasn't anti-war, it was bringing in all their pet issues. And so what I'd like to do before giving up on vigils and giving up on these demonstrations is do them right, and do them right for a while and see what happens. And I don't see them alone as ending the war. I see them as a step in building coalitions, in building groups of people, and so on. And it's just one step.
Well, it's a step that it's a positive step because you not long ago wrote about Cindy Sheehan, and Ms. Sheehan is doing something called Piece of the Action in D.C. And one of my goals, of course, is to get as many libertarians and conservatives to at least spend a few days out there with her protesting the occupation.
Yes, right. And by the way, talking about conservatives, we didn't give them much play earlier in this interview, but the conservatives from the American Conservative Magazine, Daniel McCarthy and Kara Hopkins, were tremendous. I mean, they just, I didn't even think of them as conservatives. Like, I guess I'm used to a certain kind of person being conservative, and it's someone who just tends to be, bellicose about war and so on, and they weren't. They were really, I'd say, very libertarian.
Well, I'm getting to know some of the American conservative editors. I do kind of, I think of them, I don't think of them as traditional conservatives, and I guess the word conservative, as people at LouRockwell.com would say, has been warped to mean, the murder of Muslims and hating minority groups. So it's funny, I think of them, I guess, as more of old right as opposed to conservative.
Yeah, but even for someone, I'm 59 years old, and I'm young enough that I don't even know the old right. I mean, I know them from reading their stuff, but I didn't intersect with them at all. I mean, when I got active in politics, or at least thinking about these things, it was the late 60s, and by then, the old right was long gone.
All right, well, before we wrap up, Professor Henderson, where can people read your work, in addition to antiwar.com, of course?
Well, I blog on mainly economic issues. It's something called Econ Log, and if you just Google Econ Log, you'll find it. Those are the main two places, antiwar.com and Econ Log, as well as just, I do a couple articles a year in the Wall Street Journal and other places like that.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we will have you back very, very soon to follow up on this issue.
Thanks, Angela.
Good night.
Bye.